Here are the answers for the section 10-11 assignment. Question 1, we're asked to multiply these together. So multiply the coefficients together. 2 times 4 is 8i. Number 3, same thing, you get negative 24i. Number 5, I times negative I is negative I squared. But you're not done. Whenever you have the symbol I raised to a power, you need to simplify that. And the way that is done is to use the chart from the notes. The chart started with I to the 0 power, which is defined to be 1. And then it was I to the first power, because there's just one I. The simplified version is just I. Then I squared is negative 1. I to the third is negative I. As you continue farther, the pattern starts to repeat. So I to the fourth is 1 again, I to the fifth is I, and so on going down. So when we have negative I squared, this is equal to negative of negative 1. We're replacing I squared with negative 1. And so the final answer is 1. Number 7, 5 times 4 is 20, and I times I is I squared. But I squared is negative 1. So the final answer is negative 20. Number 9, negative 4 times 11 is negative 44. But then I times I is I squared. But what are you replacing I squared with? I squared is equal to negative 1. And so the final answer is 44. Number 11, 18 divided by 3 is 6i. Number 13, 9 divided by 3 is 3, and the I divided by the I cancels away. Number 15, negative 21 divided by negative 7 makes 3, and again, I over I just cancels away. Going on, I to the 9th power. We need to simplify that by extending that pattern we looked at earlier. Well, in our pattern, how far have we already figured out? You know how we figured out that, like, I to the 4th is equal to positive 1, and then I to the 5th is equal to I? Let's figure out what I to the 9th would be. I to the 9th is I to the 4th times I to the 4th times 1 more I. But what was I to the 4th power again? Let's look back at our pattern. I to the 4th power is a 1. Let's make some substitutions. I to the 4th is just equal to 1. This I to the 4th is equal to 1. And then we had 1 more I. So the final answer is I. Now I to the 14th. We need to extend our pattern. But instead of extending the pattern farther, let's factor it like we did in the first one. I to the 14th is I to the 4 times I to the 4 times I to the 4, that's already 12 of them, times I to the 2. Those exponents add up to 14. Now all of the I to the 4ths can be replaced with what? With 1s. And how about the I squared? What's that equal to? That equals negative 1. So the final answer is negative 1. Number 5, we need to square the stuff in the parentheses. So start with the I and square it. Then square the square root of 5. That makes a 5 because squaring a square root cancels the square root and you just get the radicand. Now we're not done yet because whenever you have I to some power, you can simplify farther. I squared is negative 1. And so the final answer is negative 5. Number 7, we have the square root of this fraction. So we can think of this as the square root of negative 1 over the square root of 2. The square root of negative 1, by definition, is the symbol I. Then let's rationalize the denominator. We get I square root of 2 all over 2. Number 9, we can factor our square root of negative 48 as 16 times 3 times negative 1. Then we have 5 times, what's the square root of 16? It's 4. What's the square root of negative 1? It's I. And then the 3 stays in the radical. So our answer is 20i square root of 3. This is the same thing as 20 square root of 3 times I. Either of these is fine. If you write the second way, though, be really careful that you don't put the I under the radical. Number 11, we have 2 times the square root of 7 times negative 1. And then over here, 3 times the square root of 5 times negative 1. This makes 2i square root of 7. And this one makes 3i square root of 5. Now let's multiply these together. 2i times 3i is 6i squared. And the radicals times together as well. 7 times 5 is 35 in the radical. Now is this done yet? Is it done when you have an I squared? It's not, because I squared, remember, is negative 1. So we get negative 6 times the square root of 35. Number 13, the square root of negative 16. We can rewrite that as the square root of 16 times negative 1. And the square root of 10 we can rewrite as 10 times negative 1. The square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of the negative 1 is I. On this other one, we have I times the square root of 10. 4i times I is 4i squared times the square root of 10. But what's I squared again? I squared is negative 1. So this is negative 4 square root of 10. Number 15. The square root of 125 factors as 25 times 5. And the other one has a negative in the radical, so we want to factor this as 5 times negative 1. This makes 5 square root of 5 times I square root of 5. 5 times I is 5i, and square root of 5 times square root of 5 makes 5. So the final answer is 25i. Now the review assignment. We're asked to graph this imaginary number. So there's no real number part, so on the horizontal axis we don't go left or right, we just stay at the origin. And then go up to the 4i and put a dot there. Number 20 is the combining like terms. Negative 4 take away 6 is negative 10, plus 13 makes 3. 2i take away 8i is negative 2i, plus negative 2i is negative 4i. Number 24, this is where we solve for x and y. So x is a real number, and the 4 is the real number. So the x minus the 4 has got to turn out to be 6. Therefore, x is 10. Now let's work with the letter y. The y is going with letter I. So we have yi minus 2i, and apparently that equals negative 8i. So we got to figure out what the y is. So y take away 2 has got to be the negative 8. So what's y? Let's add 2 to both sides, and we get y equals negative 6.